Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Whirling Circles Internal Martial Arts Podcast. This is Shawn Garcia. Happy to be back. Joined as always by Frank. And we had our special co host last week, John, and John's sticking with us. We're happy to have him. We recruited him more regularly onto the show. Hopefully, we can have him as a regular co host. But yeah, thanks for everybody who's sending me warm wishes as I was going through my COVID blues, as Frank described it pretty appropriately, dealing with the stupid virus. And me and my family, we got over it really well, and everyone's recovered. Everyone's doing good. So thankful for that. And, you know, of course, our wishes go out to everyone who's battling the pandemic and dealing with all this nonsense that's coming with COVID. But we're back this week, and we're going to be talking about internal principles and how they apply to martial arts and other aspects of training, life, all that kind of stuff.
Well, we'll go back again over a thing we've done a couple of times. Internal and external are different methods of developing power. External power development, muscular contraction exercise for strength, aerobic exercises for stamina, repetitive hand-eye coordination drill to develop unconscious reflexive action for speed. Internal replaces that with mind intent, weight momentum, or pumping of the bodily fluids for strength. Relaxation and diaphragmatic breathing for stamina. Whenever possible, speed is replaced with timing and positioning. What speed there is a byproduct of the relaxation, and there is no unconscious reflexive action. It's all conscious action. And not to be confused with hard and soft, which are completely different aspects of your martial arts. Hard and soft is how you deal with power or force thrust against you. So hard, my force meets your force head on and overcomes it. Soft, give before force and come back where there is no force against you. The first internal martial arts to be noticed in the United States were Tai Chi and Japanese Aikido, both of which happen to be internal and soft. So people started thinking internal is soft, external is hard, yada, yada. But you can mix them up in any manner. Tai Chi, as you just said, is internal and soft. Xingyi is internal and hard. Bagua is internal and switches between hard and soft, sometimes in waves, sometimes in milliseconds. And as I've said, you can take like a tiger claw or eagle claw guy who grabs a punch that's coming at him, gets out of the way, latches onto it with his powerful muscles, and yanks in the direction it's going. He's doing external soft. He's giving before force and moving with it, but he's doing it in external manner. So you can mix them in any manner. But today we're going to get into what constitutes doing internals. How do you develop internals? What are the principles that you keep and manifest so that it is internal? How do you go about accomplishing these things? Weight momentum, opening and closing, diaphragmatic breathing, all the stuff that makes it internal. How do you go about it? And there are 9 basic internal principles, but there's a bunch of subsidiary ones also. And of your 9 basic internal principles, you got what we call the 4 static principles, you've got the 4 movement principles, and you've got the 1 conceptual principle. And that gives you your 9 basic principles. Static principles you learn while you're still, i.e. standing practice, which we mentioned last time. Moving principles you develop while you're moving. And the conceptual principle is a mental idea which should overlay everything. And real brief listing of them, your static principles: posture, breathing, vision, mindset. Your moving principles: unity of movement, continuity of flow, opening and closing, continuous lengthening. And then your conceptual principle, of course, is the harmony of yin and yang. And those are your basic 9 principles. Okay, to get on to our moving principles, so we've got 4 moving principles and a conceptual principle. The first of your moving principles is unity of movement. And it's something that a lot of people don't think about, a lot of teachers don't teach. And the basic idea of unity of movement is each movement generally has more than one part. And to have unity of movement, each of the parts must reach the change point at the same time and change together. And the movements are covering different distances. So to reach the change point at the same time, they have to move at different rates of speed. And like we have in basic exercise, we do this with where you shift your weight 70%. Uh, no, you shift your weight 100%. You turn your hips 70% of range of motion. Then you start doing, can you shift your weight 100%, turn your hips 70%, and get them to reach the same point at exactly the same time? Two-part unity of movement. And then you start coiling one hand up in front of your face as you shift to the opposite side from that hand and coiling it back down to your hip as you shift back to that side. Can you make that get in front of your face or back to your hip at the exact moment that you hit 100% weight shift, at the exact moment that you hit 70% hip twist? Three-part unity of movement. Then you start moving both hands, one coiling up, one coiling down. Can you get 100% weight shift, 70% hip twist, one hand coiled in front of your face, the other hand coiled back to your hip at exactly the same time? Because when the parts of a movement reach the change point at the same time, they change together and they're not broken up. And it eliminates this, what we call independent arm movement, which instantly has no power in it as opposed to unified movement. And so the idea is to have all the parts move together. And the key thing is most Tai Chi teachers try and teach continuity of flow, but guess what? You can't get physical continuity of flow in its reality if you don't have unity of movement. And it happens all the time when you step out for brush knee twist step, the initial move. Your heel should touch at the same time that one hand comes to your ear and the other hand comes to your low waist at exactly the same moment. If you don't, when you start moving forward into the next thing, it's going to be broken movement. So the first movement principle is unity of movement. And it's really important and it's rarely taught. And you have to go through it step by step by step, two part, three part, four part, put it into your forms and whatnot to get there. And it's a really, really important thing. And like I said, it's one of the things that I've seen Chinese students get just by looking at their teacher. I've never, ever seen a Western student do that. For Western students, it usually has to be broken down the way I just told you and then practiced in the exercise and then practiced in their forms. And then it starts to flow into their contact and you reach unity of movement, but you have to get it piece by piece, and most people don't even think about it, and many people have never even heard of it.
But when you're teaching, you're so when you first start teaching uh like a form, you're teaching the pieces of it, and then you're working on creating the unity of movement. Is that the process? Um,
Well, too many people these days want forms, and they want forms right away. And if you're making this living, you're living at it, there's a certain element that you have to sort of give people what they want. And they get it on the level that they get it, and they'll progress so far or not. And maybe they'll hear about it and go back. But the idea is you should do a principles class before you start doing forms, or you should have it taught within the forms. I mean, the second Tai Chi class that I taught first was done a set of exercises to work on the principles. And then that set of exercises was used as a warm up for the form in classes after that. And that's the way we went about learning it. And otherwise, yes, you can just explain it in the form as you go along. Um, but you need to have these principles somewhere along the line. And one of the most non existent ones in an awful lot of circumstances is unity of movement. And as I said, once you get this unity of movement, you can start to work on continuity of flow, which is no pauses, no breaks. You hear my classes telling people all the time, okay, you got it generally, but take the pauses out of it, so that it continuously moves. And the continuity of flow gets tricky because the continuity of physical flow at some point must match the unbroken flow of breath, which should match the unbroken flow of thought, which we've already discussed. And when you have a unity of the unbroken flow of movement, unbroken flow of breath, unbroken flow of thought, you have the potential to get unbroken flow of energy. You don't automatically have it, but then you can't get it without the other three first. And that's your continuity of flow principle. Unbroken flow of movement matches unbroken flow of breath, matches unbroken flow of thought to attempt to get unbroken flow of energy. But you can't get the unbroken flow of movement until you get the unity of movement principle.
And this is one of the things that you start to learn how to observe in, like, being able to see people doing Tai Chi that's a style or a form that you don't know. That's one of the most recognizable things to sort of evaluate the quality of their practice is something like the unity of flow. It's one of the most recognizable things when you're seeing the internal movement.
Particularly in Tai Chi because it goes slow enough to see it easily.
Right.
Whereas the same thing should be happening in Bagua and Xingyi, but sometimes you don't notice it because the movement's going too quickly. In Bagua, you tend to see the grace. In Xingyi, you tend to see the power. In Bagua, you right away see the flow.
Yeah, I always thought as a kid when I used to watch like older people dance to salsa music. I'm Puerto Rican, so there's a lot of salsa dancing. I always used to think like how cool the older people look because one they look it looks so effortless, but it also looked like they were floating. It didn't look like they were like really doing a particular step or a sequence of steps. They just looked like they were floating around, and that's what I kind of think about. You know, they've developed this movement unity, and it's kind of just one movement's moving into the next has become so instinctual and so graceful. Unless they get too
Like I
much
said,
rum, then it becomes something else.
well, like I said at the beginning, though, these principles fit any movement, and some people do it naturally, and some people, as they get older, are much more likely to do it naturally. And yes, you can definitely see it in certain older dances for sure. Then you have your opening and closing principle, which is a matter of the opening and closing of the body, which happens on different levels. It's the flexion and extension of the joints, which is a normal joint movement. And it's also the stretching and shortening of the tissues, which happens if they're relaxed enough to move. And then there's a compression and expansion of the joints, which is completely different from the flexion and extension. Compression and expansion of the joints is learning to expand, to put a little stretch on the ligaments inside each of your extensions. Like they work together. The compression and expansion happens inside the flexion and extension. And when you're extending, you practice, and it's just practice mind in the body. You get the idea and you work it. You practice putting a little stretch on the ligaments. Ligaments connect bone to bone. Tendons connect muscle to bone. Ligaments don't stretch very much. You wouldn't want to. You get them overstretched, they don't go back. You get that little bit of stretch in the ligaments in the joints. When you do that, you also stretch the synovial membrane, which encapsulates the joint. When you do that, if that joint does not have enough lubricating fluid, the synovial membrane will secrete the synovial fluid. And it's the whole action of that expansion, which gives you a healthy skeletal system, which gives you enough synovial fluid in your system to have a healthy skeletal system. And everybody knows that, like internal martial arts, is supposed to give you healthy bones. Well, if you do this, they do. If you don't, it's got nothing to do with it. And then after you have that compression, the expansion, you learn to take the synovial fluid and compress it. And you can actually use compressing the synovial fluid against the wall of the joints and releasing it quickly for short range power, which I have seen passed off as chi power, which we'll get into that when we get into chi. But it's not. It's hydraulic compression power, like any other hydraulic compression power, just using the synovial fluid of your joints for the hydraulic fluid. And it becomes a short range hydraulic compression power. And you put those three things together, the flexion and extension of the joints, the compression and expansion of the joints, and the stretching and relaxing of the tissues, and you have your opening and closings of the body, which you can see very clearly and tell where they naturally fit into your Tai Chi. Into your Bagua and Xing Yi, they have to be practiced in static postures because the general movements are too quick to put them in consciously. So what you do is you drill this opening and closing until your automatic nervous system picks it up, and then it happens in your Bagua and Tai Chi. In Bagua in particular, we've got a specific walk for developing this, which gets boring because it takes a minimum of 100 hours of this walk to drill it into your nervous system. But once you do, then it's in there and you've got it. Then you have continuous lengthening, which is a matter of continuously opening up from your center. And if you watch how people age, babies are wide open. Unfortunately, usually in a horse stance because diapers make you do that. But they're wide open. You can see that everything's stretched. And then as people get older, they collapse into their center. See, the act of getting old is the act of collapsing into your center. So the idea of continuously opening from your center is an anti-aging and health improvement thing all by itself. Now, the thing is, it's really easy in the extensions and the expansions. The trick comes in how to still be constantly lengthening in your flexions and your compressions. And the idea is if you take a rubber band and you stretch it between your fingers, if you just stretch it out and let it go back and collapse, that's opening and getting your lengthening in the extensions, but not getting it. But what you want to feel is that you take that rubber band, you stretch it out, and then as you close, you stretch it in, pull it this way into the center. Then you stretch it out from the edges, and then you pull it into the center. And it's developing that feeling through all of your movements of an external stretch and an internal stretch. And the best place to feel it is exercises where you have your arm out and you're going to bring your hand back by bending your elbow, but don't let your elbow come close to your body. Leave your elbow out where it is, and then bring your hand back with the elbow out where it is. And you get this distinct feeling of what the internal flexion stretch is. And then you try and work that through everything. And that's
Oh
your
man,
four.
the first time John was trying to teach me that, I was like, whoa, I don't understand. Where's my elbow go? It took a little bit of work.
Well, I
Yeah,
like
go ahead.
grab the elbow and stabilize it, and then bend. I do it for them. I don't let it go back. And if
Yeah,
it's stabilized out there, you feel it. But
that's a
then
good cue.
that's our four moving principles. You know, you've
Yeah,
got
and
unity of
I was,
movement, continuity of flow, opening and closing, and continuous lengthening. So that just leaves the conceptual principle, which is the harmony of yin and yang. And that's seeing it everywhere in your body, in nature, in society, that everything has its constant out movement, in movement. I mean, your body compresses and expands, flexes and extends. You look at an amoeba under the microscope, what's it doing? It's going out, it's going in, it's going out, it's going in. The universe goes out and goes in. We're just living in an out phase because it's so much bigger and longer than us. And everybody goes, oh, it's a big bang. And when it hits its coming in phase, I'm sure everybody will be going, oh, it's a big crunch. But it's, it's the universe doing the same thing. Everything goes out and comes in. And the harmony of yin and yang is just seeing and trying to understand this unity of balance of yin and yang and how it affects everything in life.
yeah. I was gonna say, we're probably, I'm probably gonna go in and edit this, so that we'll just turn this into 2 episodes, so we don't feel rushed on this movement and
Okay.
concept stuff. Because we're already a good 20, 30 minutes in on the second half of it already. But I wanted to take a step back before we get into the yin yang stuff, because I think that's probably the important way to end the conversation. And going back to the compression and expansion principle. And me and John talked about this. I got a big injury in jiu-jitsu where I had an arm bar done to me, and hyperextended my elbow, and it was a real painful thing for weeks, maybe even months. I'm not even sure, John. It was a while, and I was doing all this kind of stretching stuff and all these kind of different techniques to try to recover, and it just wasn't recovering quickly. And then John just showed me some quick compression and expansion drills with my elbow joint, and in like a week it was gone. And it was just like, whoa, like what was that, and this, I come from a strength and conditioning background, so I think about these things, but it was just a quick reminder to get back to that work. Do you think that a lot of the injuries that people have at their joints, which are constant, right? Like everyone's low back pain with their spinal joints, knee pains, hip stuff. Is it a lot because they're not doing this basic kind of internal practice of compression expansion?
Some of it. I mean, compression and expansion will help you not get injured. And as you have noticed, it's also very healing when you have been injured. So, but, nothing's perfect. The body moves the wrong way, something snaps. The body sits the wrong way for a while, because you're not aware of paying attention to your posture, and something hurts. You get older, stuff starts to change, and if you don't adjust to the changes, it hurts. That stuff just comes up. It's a matter of being human. And the idea is to minimize it happening as much as possible, and then know how to go about correcting it and healing it as best you can.
John,
I will say also so I have my work allows for a lot of time where I don't really need to move. So there's the opportunity to sit and be static more than is probably healthy. So I have a certain amount of sort of stiff muscles and things in the back and such. And regular practice, of course, helps that. But when we have done things like our trips to China, or something like a intensive workshop with Frank here in the US, and you really train this stuff for hours a day, it's amazing the difference that it makes in the body. Like it's like years of too much sort of sinking in, as Frank said, to like compressing in. You train a week or more of several hours a day of this expansion work, and it can
continuous lengthening.
Yes. You end up having, big changes in the body. So it can actually make big differences in relatively short amounts of time. I mean, maybe if you were coming from nowhere and just starting the training, you wouldn't get that fast of results, but understanding these concepts and then having the chance to train them in that environment where you're doing several hours a day, it can make a really huge difference.
Yeah, and I come from a yoga background as well, and most of the yoga that's out there is external. It's the way that they treat yoga in the U.S. Most of the systems are very like fitness oriented, and people trying to stretch out their muscles, and the tradition that I got trained up in eventually, I started with one of the more basic ones, but then the one I ended up getting trained in really focused on more internal practices. And there was a focus on standing poses first, and then breathing exercises, and then never over stretching. And in fact, the goal is not to stretch; it's to put yourself in positions that are promoting some of these kind of internal philosophies that we're talking about right now. But most of the time, you'll find that yoga practitioners, their joints are all damaged and all messed up, and they're hypermobile, or they're stretching their ligaments, like you were saying, Frank, to a point that's not healthy for their body. They're putting their body in these crazy positions that their body is definitely not ready for. Like some of these people who are doing like back bends, that their spine is compressing against each other in the opposing direction after years of just compression. Then they go to this extreme lengthening, and there's a lot of damage that can happen on that end too. Do you see some of that in people's bodies, Frank?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, obviously we're overdoing it and being a little one-sided and mean, but for a long time what we said was that internal training is training your body to find the natural ways that the body moves and move everything in the most natural manner that it does. Whereas yoga is training your body to be able to stretch it into the most unnatural postures you can imagine and still be able to hold them because you're stretched out enough. Like I said,
Right.
not all yoga is like that, but that's what it appears to be an awful lot in this country.
Yeah, I mean, most
And
people would find my yoga practice to be boring because I'm not doing all these crazy bends and stuff like that. But most of us are not ready or should never be ready to get into some of these positions. I mean, the old school yoga practice that I started doing was like 5 poses, right? Like just 5 basic poses over the course of 90 minutes. And it was more of just like a meditative state, is getting into static standing positions or seated positions that are promoting these internal philosophies that we're talking about, versus like how, can I get my head up my ass? How deep can I bend, kind of thing.
because one of the other things that tell people is yoga is from India. Most of India is a very, very hot, humid climate all the time. 12 months a year, it's hot and humid. When it's hot and humid, your muscles are more relaxed, opened up, and stringier than they are in cold weather. So taking these practices that were developed where everybody is relaxed muscles opened up and stringy just because the weather's like that, and trying to transpose them into something like a northeastern United States winter is like one of the big problems, because our bodies just haven't been through the same environmental changes.
Well, can't you just
That's
go
what
into
I
a heated
guess.
room for 90 minutes and sweat it out in Bikram?
Yeah, yeah. Then there's that Bikram yoga where if you don't die of heat stroke, you're probably closer to India than anywhere else.
I
Shawn, you're
wonder
gonna
how
ask some.
long. Well, I was just going to say, like, how long do you think it takes, particularly in heat and cold, to have a noticeable effect on the sort of the physiology in the body, like relaxing out? Certainly, when you come out of cold, there tends to be tension. Like some of my travels where I've been in places where it's like -40, and you come into a warm space, you literally still have like tension. Like it's hard to like actually relax your muscles for a while. So it's kind of an interesting question. I mean, it's not directly applying to our internal practice, but this idea of how the environment is affecting your like your posture and your musculature and everything is kind of interesting.
Growing up in it's different than trying to train in. John, we got a friend who like was going out to train in
Mm.
Malaysia with another old friend of mine, and he's from England, and he knew that it was going to be dealing with this whole weather thing. So he spent like, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks every night going down the laundry room of his building and turning on all the dryers and washers to make it as hot and humid as he possibly could and hang out for a couple hours. And when he got to Penang, it didn't do much good at all. He was still sick from the weather. I mean, he's a heavy set, he's a heavy set English guy. And he tried his best and it really just didn't work. It's different growing up there, living there all the time and trying to adjust to it in a short amount of time, even
Yeah,
with a
the
warm up of the
acclimation.
laundry room.
That's a funny way to do it, but yeah, the acclimation takes a while. I mean, I always tell people with the Bikram, I think it is kind of on topic, because with the Bikram yoga, um, when you think about your joints and ligaments heating, everything heating up and there being more movement, yeah, you're gonna have more movement, but it's not your natural extension, right? You're in an unnatural condition that's promoting some more extension, and that's not really natural. So your body might not be ready for it, and then you're going right back into your reality for the majority of the day, and you could be doing some damage to those ligaments and those joints. I mean, if you're a pregnant person, you're one of the biggest dangers that a lot of pregnant women go through is while they're pregnant, because they have the hormones secreting to create more elasticity in their joints, is joint damage. So you find a lot of women who are like damaging their knees and their spines and hips because during their pregnancy they were hyperextending them, or doing things to put their bodies in compromised positions. So I think it's better to train your reality and train within those limitations, and those are where you're going to see the real goals or gains rather. So maybe we go. Yeah, you were going to say something, John?
Well, I mean, this might be opening a can of worms, and you can keep it short as you think is appropriate. But I was going to ask you, because you have this like long history with physical training and being a personal trainer, being in the exercise world, some of this stuff is starting to work its way into physical culture in the West now, right? Whether it's things like breathing type, like understanding breathing, diaphragmatic breathing, or working with breath types of exercises, understanding things like the cold training, how it affects the body, things like understanding alignment and all of that. How much of this do you actually see sort of starting to permeate or penetrate into, that's probably the right word, penetrate into the Western ideas of training?
Yeah, I think bodybuilding culture, bodybuilding is a sport. I think that's the biggest thing for people to remember, right? You're doing these things to your body that are not necessarily the best things for your joints or your muscles, putting on massive levels of muscle that your body's probably not made for. So bodybuilding is its own kind of beast, but that kind of dominated the physical culture in the U.S., especially around exercise for the past couple of decades. And I think people started seeing the limitations with that, especially as we go into a more sedentary kind of culture where people are moving less, right? So people are not, like Frank was saying, getting the everyday kind of exercise just because of laborious jobs or active lifestyles. More and more people, especially now with the pandemic, are sitting behind computers, and so people are just breaking apart and not feeling well. And then bodybuilding and stuff like that is not really meeting the needs. So I think there's a thirst for people to find some more of this knowledge that exists. It's not any kind of secret, like Frank was saying. It's not any secret recipe. So you see it in the physical culture, where you see more people doing more breathing practice, moving away from heavy weights. I mean, the worst thing you could do as a martial artist is do bench pressing and then go to a Bhagwat class with Frank the next day. That's the worst thing you can do for your training practice. But there are ways to do strength training that are in line with some of these internal principles. I think if we take the principles that Frank is laying out and bring it into your physical training, then you could be more mindful about doing things to your body that are productive, making you strong, maybe even meeting the aesthetic that you want. Maybe you want to lose your gut or to gain some more muscle mass in your arms, but you want to do it in a way that respects your joints, respects your alignment. I think there is ways, and I think that we're learning more and more about it. And it could be as simple as, just being more intentional too in your martial arts practice, where, you're doing muscle contractions properly, and, not creating imbalances in your body, making one part of your body stronger than the other, right? You'll see a lot of martial artists who are really like strong in one leg, and their other leg they can't kick for shit. Or, someone who only trains a certain stance and never go southpaw, that can create a lot of issues. And I think as internal principles, it kind of addresses those issues. Frank, what do you have thoughts on physical training as well?
Yeah, in general, though, for years now, it's all based on, we've done a variety of things here, but we try and maintain the internal principles as much as possible. I mean, back when we had the space and had the mats and had a grappling program, our coach was wrestling based, and then catch can wrestling, and a little bit of BJJ and small circle jujitsu. But we tried to keep as much of it with internal power development as absolutely possible. Um, he had an arm wrestling team for a while. It was kind of funny, but I mean, it's kind of natural. He was the East Coast light heavyweight arm wrestling champion, and his wife was a beast. His wife was the national women's lightweight arm wrestling champion. And you talk about being a beast. Her very last match, she was so pregnant with her daughter that she couldn't face the table. So she was sitting sideways, and she couldn't get the leverage to take the girl down from sideways. But she wasn't going to move. And you talk about horrible training. This woman that she was arm wrestling with had obviously trained her musculature way beyond her bone structure. So usually, if anybody has a bone injury in arm wrestling, you're either torquing the elbow and getting the connective tissue. Occasionally, something would break in the forearm, in the ulnar, the radius. But this girl is straining so hard to take Sue down. Well, Sue just kind of sitting there. That she snapped her humerus. Her upper arm bone snapped in half because her muscles were so much stronger than her bones. And there was no give. It was, she was up against the immovable object. And they said the most horrible thing they'd ever seen in arm wrestling. It was a broken humerus. It's really horrible.
Mm.
Sue felt bad. Sue gave her the trophy. Lady said, I got a whole room full of these things. What do I care? But there's the worst of training when her muscles were trained way, way beyond her own bone structure. But no matter what we had going on, whether it was, you know, grappling or arm wrestling or anything that went on, for years we've been working on basic Western boxing with internal principles. The idea that we work on is trying to apply the internal principles to everything. And of course, the ideology that everybody would be better off if they did the same. But
Yeah.
that's
Well,
our
Frank, so like
ideology.
say
Well,
for instance we had a fighter who was trying to train for a fight and trying to build up their cardio. How would someone with internal philosophies build up their cardio for instance for a fight? What would be some good things to have in their practice?
Well, for starters, you work with your constantly diaphragmatic breathing and relaxation. And then you add just pushing your basic training as far as you can. How many rounds can you spar in a row? How many, if they're runners, how far can you run? But trying to do everything with maintaining the basic principles of your diaphragmatic breathing and your relaxation while you're working on whatever you're working on. But you still got to push yourself.
So would you, for instance, because there's an argument for like a runner, for instance, if someone's training for a marathon, some people argue, oh, you gotta run 6 days a week, and just run as far as you can every 6 days a week, and then there'll be others who say, oh, you don't have to run every day, you have to run in conjunction with doing your strength and mobility stuff, meditation stuff, right? Probably the latter would be more of an internal practice, not breaking your body down and creating some balance with some other principles.
Well, I'm not a runner.
Yeah.
Never have been. Hated it. But, running, I would imagine to run well, you have to run. But again, it's very much a mental thing. Running's very much pushing it a mental thing. Goldie's got an ex-wife who's a beast, who they used to run marathons together. Goldie once came in 900 and something in the New York Marathon, which is supposed to be really hot stuff for a race with 20,000 people in it. But he was running at one point when they were married. His ex-wife got sciatica and she couldn't train, couldn't
Mm.
train, couldn't train. And then she got in like 5 days training or something, ran the marathon with him, finished the marathon, no problem, still ran a decent time. And it was just mental toughness. So a big play in these kind of things where you're trying to push yourself is the mental toughness is absolutely as important as anything that's going on physically.
And pushing yourself to these mental barriers, these physical barriers, is not counter to internal principles.
No, you try to do it with internal principles.
I heard someone say years ago in a workshop that basically, like the breathing exercises, like keeping your diaphragmatic breathing, to this is someone who had come from a background who had already been doing a lot of different types of training and then started integrating breathing. And basically, that you have to don't expect to be able to maintain your breathing at first and do the same level of training you were doing before. But if you work with the breathing, okay, you'll reach a point at which you can't maintain the breathing. But as you continue to train that breathing, you will ultimately surpass what you were capable of before. So it's like you have to take a step back or even two steps back in order to ultimately go farther.
And when it comes to stamina, there's always a point where you're going to lose your breathing and it's going to come up. But the question, like you're just saying, is where is that point? How far can you take it before you lose that point?
Mm.
And in something like fighting in long races, then how long can you keep going after you lost it just on your mental toughness? But there's always some point. I mean, you don't become superhuman. You just work to the best of your ability to maintain these efficient principles.
Mm. So let's get back to the last one that we were talking about with our conceptual principle with the yin and yang. Um,
Yin and
what
yang.
yin and yang? I always yes, yin.
Yes, I
Um,
corrected you that last time, you.
I'll blame it on my New Yorican accent. I always say things with a little bit of extra. So yeah, so finding that balance, um, you know, in your martial arts training, how does it come out to play? Like we talk about hard and soft, but maybe some of these concepts are a little unfamiliar to people. So how does it come out in actual practice?
Well, someone has to teach it to you, and then you work on them as I laid it out. Or is it some people by trial and error trying to figure out what's the least tiring way to do whatever they're doing can discover that it's a lot slower through trial and error than it is in a systematic method of training these things. I said that's why the old guys that are doing it in their work, well, they've been doing that work for decades. So they figured out through trial and error what kept them the least tired and accomplished the most work. And so there is no real trick to it at all. You just learn it or you discover it through trial and error and then you work it.
Shawn, you were asking about the last one, the conceptual, like the balance of yin and yang. Is that was the thing?
Yeah.
Frank, you can probably articulate this much better than I can, Frank. But what occurs to me is something like weight the weight shifts in Tai Chi being compared to a full cup and an empty cup. Like the full cup is weighted and the empty cup is unweighted. So you have this smooth pouring of water or weight from one side to another as you move. This type of thing, does that fall under the balance of yin and yang, Frank? Like you're moving through these weighted and unweighted types of positions, and there's these smooth transitions between them.
Well,
Is
in
that
general, in Tai Chi, it's considered that for a long time, one of the representations of yin and yang are your weight shifts. And your heavy side is the yin and the light side is the yang. And yes, and they transit as smoothly as possible. But the idea of the conceptual element of yin and yang is just saying that everything in life has a yin yang side that's constantly moving like that weight. And as I said, Tai Chi in particular has represented it a lot, been written down about how the weight shifts represent the yin and yang, with the heavy side yin and the light side is yang. And it goes back and forth. But everything, I mean, day and night. Night is yin, day is yang. Hot is yang, cold is yin. The idea is seeing that everything in life has this duality. That whole thing, like we talk about in our philosophy classes, from Wuji and nothingness comes Taiji or yin and yang. So from nothingness comes life, and everything in life has this balance. And the idea is to recognize it in everything, including recognizing it in your internal martial arts, that everything is yin and yang. Anything that goes out from your center is yang. Anything that comes back is yin. But it's just seeing that this balance is everywhere.
This also manifests in something like the flow of a fight, right, Frank? It's like this concept, like understanding something like a confrontation as not just the moment that you're in, but like the way that energy is moving, the way that yin and yang is happening and playing out within the movement between the two people. Is that kind of part of it also, Frank? The seeing that in the fight, in the martial arts.
Yes. Yeah, but the idea is seeing it in everything. You can see it in the flow of politics. You can see it in the flow of culture. In China, you can see it from one dynasty to the other, that they almost all begin yang and end yin. It's the idea is seeing it everywhere in everything.
Awesome. So maybe we can end it there. We had a really fruitful conversation about it all. The last question I have, though, to round it out is, with these principles, so these are 9 basic principles. There's, many layers within each of them. But as someone is going through their training, for instance, for martial arts, are they trying to implement all these principles at the same time? Are you learning one at a time? Is there a benefit to learning them in a certain sequence, a certain order? How does someone go about bringing this more into their practice?
Well, the sequence that I laid it out is the basic way that you should conceivably learn it. But it isn't like it's going to take years and years and years. Somebody lays it out and you start to integrate it into your training in your martial arts. Now you have to get, as I said, you have to get the unity of movement before you're actually going to get the true continuity of flow. But once you have the concept, you start working on getting all this stuff together. And it shouldn't take that long to get the 9 basic concepts. And then you start integrating them into your martial arts.
So starting with the static concepts, moving into the movement, and then the conceptual. That kind of makes sense too, because if you got it in a static position, it's probably going to be easier to grasp while you're in movement, going through movements.
All the static principles have to be maintained in the moving principles. So first you get the static principles, and then you're going to maintain this posture, breathing, vision, mindset within your moving principles. But you learn them in the static principles.
It shows why standing is such a foundational practice in Chinese martial arts, particularly in internals. But the standing is where you start with integration. And then when you start to move, you're bringing those things that you learned from the standing into the movement.
And it's all Chinese martial arts. B.B. Chan used to talk about when he was 10 years old, his father brought him to his friend, the martial arts instructor, because he thought he was an incorrigible boy. And they were going to teach him some discipline. And for the first 6 months, he stood about 6 inches away from the wall, stood in a horse stance, and faced the wall for the class. And every time he turned around and looked at what was going on in the class behind him, the teacher hit him with a stick. and then they graduated to the nail machine. You remember the story of the nail machine?
I remember.
They had this thing where apparently the teacher had this thing that was, you talk about stuff you couldn't get away with today. The teacher had this thing. You know how they have this thing in school that measures your height coming down? Yeah. Well, they had a base that the student could straddle in his stance. Probably, I think it was shoulder width. By then, you're doing the shoulder width stance. And they had one of these things that came down and one of these things that came up, except they each had nails. So they'd slide one down till a nail touched the center of the kid's head, and another one up till a nail touched the center of his crotch. and then the teacher would leave the room for the amount of time you're supposed to stand. And Chan used to tell us that was after he did the standing facing the wall and getting hit with a stick. That was the next thing, was the nail machine. And that was not internal. That was a Shaolin class.
Oh man. Well, thankfully there's some things with the politically correct world that I don't have to encounter. I don't want no nails in my groin. Oh
I spent
man.
years trying to find somebody who would make me a nail machine.
Hopefully none of our listeners have those connections.
Well, I don't have a place to keep one now, so you're all safe. Plus, it's hard to do the nail machine over the internet.
All right, cool. So yeah, we don't know what next week will be. We have a bunch of cool topics lined up, but we don't want to put it out there, and we switch it last minute. But definitely, I think we're gonna split into 2 episodes. This principle things. I think this is gonna be really, really beneficial to everybody as they're developing their internal practice. Frank, what do we have going on with the Wudang that you want to share with people? What kind of classes and offerings do you have going on right now?
Well, of course, for January and February, we've been doing strictly internet Zoom classes, and we're hoping that the weather comes around in March that we can start to integrate the live backyard classes because social distancing and mask, et cetera, et cetera. But we're going to just try for the early spring of adding a couple of live classes on Fridays, and then hopefully by um, May at least, we'll be ready to start doing Wednesdays and Fridays in the yard again. But we're going to add, we're going to do them not as strictly yard classes this time, but we're going to take a shot at doing hybrid classes. So it will be yard and Zoom simultaneously.
Oh boy.
And like I said, we'll try it out with the 2 classes on Friday evenings in March and April. And then hopefully we'll have it down by the time it gets warm enough to do more than that. And I think the 2 classes that we're going to do on Fridays are going to be, Tina's going to do a Tai Chi class like she did on Fridays before, which will be a mix of empty hand and sword. And then I will continue with my Friday Bagua weapons, where we'll continue working on the elbow knives until people have that set and really feel comfortable with it. And then we're going to do the Bagua broadsword set that's based on the I Ching set. And then we'll see where it goes from there. But we're going to be coming up with those. Wednesdays and Fridays will still be the special classes. It's just Wednesdays will continue to be special classes on the Zoom only, and Fridays will be the hybrid classes. So it'll be the usual, one price to do everything except Wednesday and Friday, and another price for Wednesdays and Fridays, but they're all ridiculously inexpensive. So it should be no problems there.
For sure.
And
if
of course,
anyone, go ahead.
And we're trying to get some people to write some reviews for Tai Chi Club, a documentary on Amazon Prime. And plus, we'd also like anybody that hasn't done it to go back and write reviews on the books on Amazon. Also, Whirling Circles of Bagui Shan, Classical Northern Wu Style Tai Chi Chuan, Qigong for Women, Three Treasures Qigong, because particularly the first 2, the martial arts books, the Bagua and the Tai Chi book, we're really lucky that they've been in print for 12 years already. A lot of those books do not stay in print that long, but if we're going to continue to be in print, we could really use some new reviews there on the books also. So that's kind of what's going on at the moment with the classes. And of course, Tina's got a couple other documentary projects in the work, but those will probably be quite a while in the making, because for one thing, they're going to maybe require a bit of travel, and God knows when we can do that again. But there's a couple more documentaries in the works also. So we're keeping stuff moving along. And then, of course, there'll be more and more podcasts.
Yes, definitely. And
So,
we'll have all
with those-
the links to the Amazon links for the books and for the documentary in the show notes, so people can find those links there, so they can write some reviews.
And subscribe to the podcast and write the iTunes reviews and give us all the likes, and let's try and get some algorithm stuff going there.
Yeah, for sure. And also too, when you see us post on Facebook or Instagram or any of the places where you follow us, feel free to reshare it. You know, it just takes a second of your time, but it gives us a lot of help in getting more exposure for all this awesome work. And you know, if you're listening to the show, you appreciate all the stuff that we're sharing on here. I mean, Frank just dropped some serious lessons in these last two podcasts. So you know, share those resources because they're free, and we want to make them available to as many people as possible. So yeah, so thanks so much, Frank. Thanks so much, John.
Sure.
We'll be back next week talking about some more cool stuff, and hope you all have a great week.
All right.
So long.
Thanks, Shawn.